With escalating cyber risks in the new cyber norm, securing devices, networks, and digital assets takes a much broader risk-based vulnerability management strategy. We will learn more about it from the presentation of our next speaker from Tenable, a company that ensures the security over 30,000 organizations from around the globe. With over 20 years of experience in the ICT industry, he is responsible for supporting enterprise and public sector organizations throughout the region with identifying their risk-based vulnerability management and cybersecurity strategies. The Head of Operational Technology APAC of Tenable, Mr. Richard Bussiere.
Keeping up with the latest cyber threats can feel like a never-ending race. And defending your network is becoming even more challenging, with remote workers introducing new security risks. When you look at the data, what is it really telling you? And how do you know where to begin? Legacy methods like only using CVSS scores to prioritize risk means throwing away hours of work on vulnerabilities that don't pose any immediate risk. Worse, it means losing focus on issues that warrant immediate attention. It's time to find another way. The answer is risk-based vulnerability management. By isolating the small percentage of flaws that pose actual risk, you can focus on the most urgent threats affecting your most critical assets, allowing your security team to save time, work smarter, and actively defend the expanding attack surface. Focus on what matters most.
Hello, I'm Richard Bussiere, Head of Operational Technology for Tenable Asia Pacific. Today, we're going to talk about mapping security frameworks to the Philippine National Security Law of 2022. So the agenda for today will be a quick introduction to the Philippine National Cybersecurity Plan. We'll talk about architecting security in the age of where we are now, which is IT and OT convergence, where the two worlds are beginning to collide, and that is beginning to accelerate. We'll talk about prevention and detection by leveraging the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS framework, which is a nice description of how an attack may occur. It allows you to do gap analysis and then fill the gaps and make yourself as secure as you possibly can be. And we'll talk about the practical application of various security frameworks that you may choose to use to help secure your operational technology environment against the threats. So the primary thrust of the plan are really four things. First of all, the Philippine government is taking a deep understanding of the fact that critical infrastructure must be trusted and must be secure and must be resilient to any type of cyber attack. So the approach taken by the government is essentially a mission assurance technique that is based on involving all levels and all departments of the organization. And to that, I'll stress very much that the IT organization of a given company needs to work very closely and tightly and hand in hand, basically, with the OT organization to ensure there's a harmonious synchronization of security strategy and a mutual understanding of the requirements of each side of the fence. There's an emphasis on securing government infrastructure, and this is primarily based on the assumption that the government infrastructure is a very tempting target for the theft or manipulation of critical information that is sensitive to the Philippine government, as well as things like personally identifiable information of individual people, which can be stolen or manipulated by adversaries. We need to ensure that businesses are secure and that things like illegal money transfers, information theft, and various types of phishing attacks are mitigated to the best degree they can possibly be mitigated. And I think probably the most important thing of all is making every Filipino aware of the risk that they're exposed to through the proliferation of intelligent devices and their roles and responsibilities in trying to make themselves secure and make society as a whole secure. So this is a very good plan. I think it's very well thought out, and I believe it needs to be carefully analyzed and understood. The guiding principles of the plan, first one is the rule of law and the understanding that cyberspace is not the Wild West. Law applies in cyberspace in exactly the same way that it applies in the physical world. So rule of law is paramount and one of the guiding principles of the overall plan. There's a degree of autonomy and self-governance. So the purpose of the government is to help guide you in what you should do to make yourself secure, but you are given autonomy. The government is not prescribing exactly how you should do it. It's saying you need to be secure, but how you do it is applicable to your own specific organization. So this really comes out of respect by the government for freedom, democracy, and the individual rights. So you need to make yourself secure, but how you do it, that's entirely up to you, but just do it. It respects the fact that involving and becoming secure involves a collaboration of multiple stakeholders and indeed international sharing of information between multi-countries, both in Asia and throughout the entire planet. So cooperation and collaboration of intelligence related to threat information, as a good example, is very important. And additionally, creating layers of defense through multiple partners of multiple organizations working in a coordinated manner is part of the guiding principles of this legislation. A balance has to exist between the free flow of information and individual privacy rights. There are some cases where it's required to get personally identifiable information for certain emergency situations. You can even use COVID as an example, where what used to be considered private information is frequently accessed by the government, perhaps as a control mechanism to help identify where COVID might be breaking out. So you have to respect individual privacy rights, but you also need to understand that there is a need sometimes to think of the greater good over the rights of the individual. So we're trying to balance that as well. And I think that's very good. And lastly, fundamental to any security framework is a risk-based management approach, meaning that you understand the risks that you're exposed to by not analyzing the devices that may be subject to attack or the information that might be subject to attack, and then considering the probability of an attack, the appetite of an attack, and what controls need to be implemented in order to prevent the attack from occurring. And that is generally called a risk-based management approach. So these are the guiding principles. Again, it's a very well thought out framework. The framework has a focus on critical infrastructure, and critical infrastructure is generally defined as those services that we take for granted, but without which modern life would not be possible. And that would pretty much be composed of what you see here on this page. Water distribution, as well as the removal of wastewater, obviously power generation and power distribution, oil and gas distribution. Example of how catastrophic a failure there can be is Colonial Pipeline in the US this year. Transportation control systems for air, land, and sea. And again, we're seeing how serious disruptions can be as a result of the current problems we're having with supply chains internationally. Government and emergency services, and obviously financial services. People always need to be able to get their money. So the focus of the plan is to really do its best to help to secure these critical infrastructures that we all depend on every single day. So let's just use the Colonial Pipeline as an example of what shouldn't happen. And in fact, what could pretty well be prevented. Colonial Pipeline was attacked. It was a ransomware attack. The initial vector for the attack was a VPN server. The VPN server had a username and a password, of an individual who was no longer employed by Colonial Pipeline. Through some mechanism, which we still don't know how, the attackers were able to get this username and password. And of interesting note is the fact that this particular VPN server did not have two-factor authentication. In fact, if it had two-factor authentication, the entire attack would have been prevented. So fine, the attackers get in through the VPN. They managed to leverage Active Directory to facilitate the attack, learning additional points where they should be attacking, learning user credentials, and basically being able to map out the entire infrastructure from that. They were able to compromise the entire IT network of Colonial Pipeline, but out of an abundance of caution, the CEO himself made the decision to shut the entire pipeline down. And it was down for, I believe, about 6 days. Now, the key takeaway here is a couple takeaways. First of all, the interconnectivity between the 3 tiers. There's an IT network, a flow network to measure how much fluid is delivered to any point, and the OT network itself. The interconnectivity between those different tiers was not completely understood, which is what motivated the CEO to shut the pipeline down. The second thing is, it really serves as a very clear demonstration of the impact that privately owned infrastructure can have on the national security and the economy of a country. This single pipeline supplied 48% of the gasoline to the East Coast of the United States. And as the attack progressed, many gas stations, I don't know the exact number, had to shut down, and people were going without gasoline and couldn't drive anywhere, and it was just chaos. So, and this was only for 6 days. So this stuff needs to be protected. It needs to be protected well, because any disruption has very serious ramifications. So if we look at a security framework, what should a critical infrastructure security framework consider? This is an example that's given to us from a publication coming out of the United States, NIST Special Publication 1800-23. And it specifies really 5 different domains. First is, in order to understand how to secure your critical infrastructure, you need to know what's there. You can't secure what you don't know about. So asset discovery, establishing a baseline of all of the physical and logical devices that are present within the environment. That would be computer systems, industrial control systems, PLCs, software, everything. You need to understand what's within the environment and the risks that each of those things might be exposing you to. The risk can be identified through the identification, the enumeration and expansion of characteristics of the device, so that you know who made it, what model it is, what operating system it's running, and so on. All very, very important, so that you can understand the full risk that any element in the environment might be exposing you to. You need visibility. So you need to be able to identify newly connected or disconnected devices as they appear or disappear, on the theory that a new device could be potentially malicious or could be a misconfiguration. You need to continuously identify or monitor the attributes in the identification parameter, in the identification column, in case things change. So you know the state of any given system at any time, and you need to understand all of the interconnections that are present in the environment, so that you can detect changes when things occur. You need to be able to understand how important something is. So for example, which devices in my environment are of exceptionally high criticality to me and would cause me a significant amount of damage, or my business a significant amount of damage if they were to be disturbed. That's very important. And we need to understand how and why devices are communicating with each other. Lastly, but critically important, is monitoring of all this on a continuous basis, so that you can determine when a deviation from your baseline occurs and react to it, because the deviation has a good potential of being an early indicator of compromise. Somebody's in your network. We'll take a quick look at the Purdue model here, and this is how most critical infrastructure systems are actually engineered. Level 0 is the physical layer, and these are the machines that are actually being controlled. So level 0 will consist of the motors, relays, pumps, switches, valves, and anything else that makes up a system that needs to be controlled. Level 0 is controlled by devices known as programmable logic controllers that exist at level 1 of the Purdue model. And these devices are basically operating in a tightly coupled manner to the physical processes that they're controlling. They'll command a physical process to do something. the physical process will react and start, and they will monitor and adjust the physical process as that process continues to run. I like to call level 1 the cyber physical layer, because this is where the digital world and the kinetic world intersect. And any disruption at level 1 can have very serious consequences, because when you're dealing with physical things, you're dealing with things that can hurt or kill people or destroy equipment that may take you months or years to replace. So any attack that occurs at level 1 is actually very serious. When we start to go up to levels 2, 3, and beyond, we start to see things like engineering workstations and human machine interfaces. In an operational technology environment, the vast majority of these devices are most often based on commodity software. For example, they may be based on Linux. Most of them are actually based on Windows, but because of the KPIs of operational technology, those KPIs being safety, availability, and quality, very frequently these devices are not patched and they're not upgraded, because the responsible person has to analyze the risk that a patch will actually disrupt something. So if something's working perfectly fine, there's a good deal of resistance to patching it. So as a result, the devices that exist within an operational technology environment are typically not patched to the latest version, or maybe even obsolete operating systems such as Windows 7 or even Windows XP. That creates a risk as we have a converged environment, because you have the potential of an adversary penetrating the operational technology environment and perhaps compromising these devices with some kind of ransomware. So here are the facts. Lower level entities, the things at the cyber physical level 1, are controlled by higher level digital control systems that are generally based on commodity off-the-shelf software that is probably not patched. Compromise of these higher level entities can be exceptionally disruptive. Either I disrupt the operation of these higher level entities and prevent people from seeing what's going on at level 1, or I can use these as an attack vector to destroy level 1. That's the second key fact. And the third key fact is that the patch and maintenance state of the commodity software existing at levels 2, 3, and up is very frequently impossible to ascertain. It's unknown because in general, operational technology environments don't do formal vulnerability management like IT departments do. And again, a lot of this is because of the KPI. I run a plant. My job is to keep it running all the time. And so I'm afraid to take risks. So I'm not going to take the risk of a patch disrupting my processes. So let's have a quick look at the Philippines real quick. The PNCP master plan has these 4 key metrics. First, create a baseline of indicators of the state of your critical infrastructure. And as a matter of fact, that really maps nicely to what we were saying a few slides ago. I shouldn't have done that. So effectively defend and create baseline on the state of the CII. I'm not going to read everything here because it's all going to be available in the slides. Next, you need to reach the desired state of having a resilient CII. So step 1 is understand where I am. Step 2 is implement plans and establish mechanisms that will allow me to determine what I need to do to have a resilient CII and the investments that I need to make in making my CII resilient. So it could be investment in better security policies, in training people, or in purchasing and deploying security technologies, and possibly, of course, implementing a vulnerability management plan. Next, I need to establish a multi-layer defense with the business sector. And this kind of gets into the IT-OT integration that we keep talking about. And effectively what that means is I need to have a catalog of existing external critical systems. I need to share information between the OT world and the IT world. And I need to understand all the vulnerabilities that I might be being exposed to, perhaps vulnerabilities that exist as a result of IT-OT convergence. And last, I think this next one is kind of a good one, And this is societal sectors and general population and small and medium enterprises, which are always at great risk. In general, again, everybody has a smartphone now, and things like phishing attacks and attacks like that are very, very exposed to general population to a great deal of vulnerability, and everybody needs to be made aware of the risk and what to look for in terms of maybe social engineering attacks. These impact the general population. They also impact a very large number of relatively small and medium-sized enterprises within the Philippines. And there is a special emphasis on educating youth at this point. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity frameworks and mechanisms. And the point of this slide is, and this is actually very true for me, as I read different frameworks, they all basically look the same, but they also look different. And that's the key point of this slide, is that every country has their own cybersecurity framework, but they all more or less say exactly the same thing. So given that fact, Tenable recommends that the NIST cybersecurity framework be used as a way to comply with the PNCP. Okay, and the reason why is because the NIST cybersecurity framework allows you to map the requirements of the PNCP into a common language, and then map existing security frameworks into that same common language. So it all, even though it's different, it's all expressed in a consistent language. So, which is what it basically says in the first bullet point. All cybersecurity activities are expressed in the same way, independent of which actual framework that you happen to employ. The cybersecurity framework in this CSF provides guidance that allows you to understand what security controls should be present and reinforce those security controls, while at the same time ensuring that you maintain the business requirements and that the controls that you place, create, do not interfere with operational objectives of the business. Key point, as I kind of alluded to already, is the fact that the NIST CSF leverages existing standards for compliance. So if I'm using 27001, if I'm using CIS or any one of the other plethora of security frameworks, I can map those very, very nicely into the CSF and then express that in a common way. And I can even combine different frameworks if I choose to do that. Lastly, and significantly, it provides a nice tool that lets you measure how effective your cybersecurity program is, independent of which framework you use to begin with. So these are some reasons why the NIST CSF is actually a very good place to start and a good tool to use as you try to comply with PNCP. But I think one of the strongest parts is the fact that it provides a common common language for all levels within the organization, and it allows for everybody to work in a cooperative manner. So, for example, the executive level is responsible for assessing the risk to the organization at a high macro level, at the organization level. So they will decide what risk they need to happen, they need to address. They'll decide the risk appetite, how much risk we can accept and how much we need to try and mitigate. And then they're going to allocate the budget. At that point, it becomes a process level problem. And the risk management people are going to take the budget and select the security profile that needs to be met and allocate the budget that was created by the executive level, at which point it goes to the operations level where the actual security mechanisms will be created and deployed. The nice thing about this framework is, as you can plainly see, there is feedback. So there's feedback from the operations level to the process level, and then there's feedback from the process level to the executive level. So the framework facilitates continuous change, because as everybody knows, nothing stays still on the internet or in business for any length of time. New risks are always being created, and you need to react to and implement process changes to address those risks as and when they occur. Now, let's take a quick look at the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS framework, because this is important to understand. And essentially what it is MITRE in about, I think, March of this year, March of 2021, released this, and it essentially will show the stages of an attack against critical infrastructure at layers 1 through layers 3 of the critical infrastructure. And that's expressed on a horizontal axis. And the vertical axis is showing you the precise steps that an attacker would take to execute any one of these phases. So that's what MITRE for ATT&CK for ICS is for. And what it's good at is helping you to identify gaps, things that you may choose to secure in your environment to help to prevent one of these stages from actually being executed in your critical infrastructure. Now, we have 3 tools at our disposal to help address the techniques that attackers would use during a cyber attack against your critical infrastructure. The first is illustrated in the teal circle, which is in our case, Tenable.ot. And this is going to give me the ability to baseline my asset inventory, my communications infrastructure, who's talking to who and what types of communication that take place in my environment, and also perform a measure of active threat detection. So watching the network and looking for activities that are indicative of a cyber attack. So that's one part. Secure the operational technology stuff, the stuff that lives at level 1, level 2, and level 2.5 of the Purdue model. Then there's everything else. Any operational technology environment is going to have a large population of software that's running on top of commercial off-the-shelf operating systems. So the next thing I need to do is I need to understand the risk that those devices will expose me to. So Tenable.sc, which is integrated with Tenable.ot, will provide that functionality. So now I've got 2 sides of the coin covered already. I've got the OT assets covered. I've got the IT assets covered. Now let's go back to the Colonial Pipeline attack. That was a case of the attacker leveraging access for somebody who shouldn't have access anymore. So by employing techniques to monitor perhaps the Active Directory system within your operational technology environment, you can assess who has access and what levels of privilege any individual may have in the environment. So what I have basically is the intersection of these 3 circles in this Venn diagram are what give you, in our opinion, complete OT security. So if I take all 3 and apply the techniques that are supported all 3 of these technologies, I'm going to have the ability really to detect and even mitigate many of the things that an attacker would do in the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS framework. So it gives me a good sense of security. So basically things that Tenable.ot will help you with are in teal. What Tenable.sc will help you with are illustrated in gray, and Tenable.ad in blue. And you can see in a lot of cases, there's some where there's a combination, there's some where it's exclusive to the specific domain. So again, employing these 3 things at the same time gives you a very, very good degree of coverage in your operational technology environment. So tools for this are available now. In fact, Tenable.sc supports a set of dashboards that are very specific to the cybersecurity framework and can tell you how compliant or non-compliant your organization might be. This is an example of one of those dashboards. Drilling down in any one of these dashboards will allow you to identify the specific vulnerabilities that any asset in the environment may actually be exposing you to, so that you can address those either by patching or by employing compensating controls. And because Tenable.ot and Tenable.sc are integrated, I can leverage Tenable.sc to get an understanding of the cybersecurity position of my operational technology environment. So I'm really doing all this work from one pane of glass, which is very nice. So to summarize, very simple takeaway to this. In order to secure your operational technology environment, there are 3 things that you need to do. And this maps into all of the frameworks that I just discussed. Very simple. First of all, establish a baseline of all of your assets within the operational technology environment. The IT assets, the OT assets, the routers and switches. Understand the configurations of those assets, the state of the code in those assets, the revision level of those assets, and the vulnerabilities that might exist inside of those assets. Number two, do the same thing for the communication protocols. So understand which devices are communicating with which other devices in the environment and why. Understand which external connections are there and why. Anything that shouldn't be there, eliminate. Once you've done that, you now have a baseline of the assets that belong in my environment, of the communication protocols that belong in my environment, and how the various elements are communicating. At that point, I can begin the process of continuous monitoring. I can watch the traffic and I can begin to identify anomalies in traffic. I can begin to identify communications that probably shouldn't be taking place. And I can even monitor for actual intrusions that might be taking place in the environment. So doing the monitoring will give you an early indication that something is wrong and that you may be under a cyber attack. So last slide, we would appreciate your feedback. You can scan that code and visit our booth and fill out the survey form. And you complete a survey and you have the possibility of winning a food voucher. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please ask. Thank you.